Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am O'Brien McMahon, and this is People Business. In this episode, I'm joined by Kendra Brodin. Kendra is the founder and CEO of EsquireWell, a lawyer well-being and professional development company providing consulting, training, and the EsquireWell Academy, a cutting-edge online learning community to help lawyers to be happier, healthier, and more successful. Prior to founding her company, Kendra was Chief Attorney Development Officer at a large national law firm where she managed firm-wide lawyer training and development as well as well-being initiatives. And I mentioned this in the conversation, but this isn't a conversation about lawyers. Kendra specializes in lawyers where the environment is high pressure, high stress. There are a lot of lessons that can be learned when it comes to performance and recovery and mental health. And in this conversation, we go deep into the, we'll call them softer side or the people skills side of work when it comes to performance and how that relates back to the hard skills and making you actually better at the things that you do as a professional. So for anyone who likes thinking of themselves as a corporate athlete, as a mental athlete in relation to the work you do, this is for you. There's a ton in here, and Kendra has a lot to share. I enjoyed it. I hope you enjoy it. Here is Kendra Brodin. Kendra, welcome to the show. Very excited to have you on today and talk about high performance and mental health. I think this will be a really fascinating conversation. So welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much, O'Brien. I'm delighted to be here. So grateful that you invited me. Thank you.
So just let's start at the beginning. What do you do and how did you come to be doing that work?
Yeah, my company is called EsquireWell. So I have a background both in social work and in law. And so when you ask me, what do? I spend most of my days talking. Sometimes at the end of the day, I said, I'm flat out of words for the day because I'm always talking and sharing in some way. And the forms that take include speaking and training. So I do a lot of in-person and webinar-based training on many of the topics that we're going to talk about today. I also do coaching, individual coaching, and group coaching as well. And then I record trainings. I do on-demand trainings on a variety of platforms. So I think it's the person in me that was an education major in college originally before heading off to social work school and law school that loves to teach and share information. When I acquire information, I love to share it if it's going to have a positive impact on someone. So that's what I get to spend my day doing in one way or another. And your second question, what drew me to that work? I think it is that combination of the heart and the mind. I sometimes joke I have the heart of a social worker and the brain of a lawyer, and I have training in both. And I like to straddle that line between the two, sort of merge the two, bring the social worker mentality and skill set into the legal profession. And as an active and a former practicing attorney, a licensed attorney, I understand that world too. And I understand what attorneys and law students and legal professionals need and what they're going through at any given point. And so I love to bring that social worker background to it while also having the analytical skills and the temperament of an attorney too. So I can go toe to toe with the best of them.
Fantastic. Thank you. One of the things that I like to do, or I just find interesting with the show, is to bring in folks who are working at the extremes. I think it's one of the reasons that everybody's so fascinated with the Navy SEALs, right? Is like that's an extreme. And there are things that you can learn from the way that they think and perform that you can then translate back and sort of scale back into normal society. And I think when you look at professions, the legal profession, law firms, being a lawyer, is kind of an extreme profession. There's a tremendous amount of high expectations, I'll say, on performance, both the quality of the work, the importance of the outcomes of a lot of the work, and the hours that are required. And then there's also a ton of strain and stress from that, a bunch of side effects that can happen, unfortunately do happen in the world of law firms. And so I think for anybody who's thinking about themselves as a corporate athlete or thinks about the work they do as performance in some way. I'm excited for this conversation because I think we can tease a lot out of that in the work that you're doing to train attorneys that apply well beyond just attorneys. So for anyone listening who's like, well, I'm not an attorney, that's not the point of what we're going to be talking about today. We're just going to be couching these subjects in that world because I think it can be kind of an extreme world. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I love how you stated that, O'Brien, and I completely agree. I think I work with lawyers because I am one, and so I feel like I understand them and I can work with them in that way. But I also often even say to them that very little, if anything, I'm sharing in terms of the knowledge, the research, the data, the skill set, the strategies are specific to lawyers. I think anyone out there sort of functioning in whatever role they're functioning in that wants to be at the top of their game, these skills will benefit them and serve them. Like you said, I just happen to work with lawyers. That's my niche, but they're translatable to any profession, to any person doing anything where they're extending themselves beyond their comfort zone, where they want to be at their best, where they're coming up against their own perceived limits and wanting to stretch beyond those, wanting to feel better, wanting to perform better. Absolutely. Everything I would share would expand beyond legal.
So let's set this up a little bit. What are the demands placed on attorneys these days?
I think we know what we see on TV sometimes, and some of that does reflect pieces of real life, but it's always dramatized, of course, as we know with anything that we're seeing that's been filtered through a camera and through Hollywood. I think lawyers and legal professionals, but particularly lawyers, what's it look like? They work in all sorts of practice areas, of course. So the actual tasks and work and subject matter differs greatly, just like it would for doctors. They're all studying a different body part. Same in law. Lawyers are all studying or focused on different parts of the law, and that's a very extensive thing. There's thousands and thousands of laws on the books and different kinds of lawyers. That being said, the commonality I see in what they're facing includes long hours, many of them, the ones we're talking about, the ones who are maybe facing the challenges that we're going to talk about today, they're facing really long hours driven, at least in private practice, by billable hour requirements, where they can only bill time based on what they're actually doing for clients, which means anytime that they're going to the bathroom, eating lunch, taking time out for some self-care, having a conversation with a colleague next door, taking a walk, doing anything that's not directly for a client, then it's not billable. So you can imagine how hard that is to get in those billable hours while trying to do other things throughout the day. Lots of tight deadlines, in some practice areas more than others, but in most there are deadlines, and sometimes the turnaround is very, very quick. And yet you're expected to do your very best work under those tight timelines. So it's sometimes a conflicting priority, trying to do the quickest work you can at the very best level you can, which makes it challenging, and where your mistakes could have dramatic negative impacts on your client, whoever that client is, a business, an individual, whatever, or whoever that client is. If you miss a word or misinterpret or forget to turn a page over because you're moving too fast, there could be dramatic negative impacts, and you could get in such trouble as to be sanctioned in an ethical way or lose your license. So the pressure is high, the deadlines are tight, the hours are long, and you don't really have enough time oftentimes to do your very best work. And your clients are sometimes very demanding. Your clients are stressed out. Your clients hired you because they're facing something very, very important, potentially damaging to them personally or professionally or their business, something they have worked maybe their whole life to build. And now they're in a situation where, but for your help, they're going to lose it all. Or again, personally, maybe they've had a marriage they've spent their whole lifetime trying to build, or children they're trying to take care of. And if you mess it up, they could lose custody or something like that, really dramatic stuff. And so there's an emotional component to the work that lawyers do as well. And then finally, We're in an adversarial system in law. Again, you know this from the TV shows. We're always fighting with each other, or there's always someone on one side, someone on the other side. So you're in a defensive posture. You're afraid of making a mistake. You sometimes, in zealously advocating for our clients, we get a little rough on the other side too. So you're not always dealing with the friendliest, most helpful, kind people on the other side as well. So all of those factors taken together really can make for a particularly challenging professional experience for lawyers.
Yeah, there's definitely, you mix that all up in a stew, and it's a very high pressure environment for sure. What are the traits required to navigate that? Like, what do you see as the key traits to being able to perform at a high level?
I always mention that substantive skills, sort of the skills and the knowledge in your practice area, having high levels of substantive skills are just table stakes. It's what gets you in the door. It gets you your job. And you have the grades, or you have the skills, or you have the experience. You can do the work. I'd be remiss if I didn't say that was important. Of course, that's a critical skill to be able to do your work well. So I'm not dismissing the quote hard skills, the substantive skills of the work. That goes without saying. But what we find is that the most successful attorneys who have the most sustainable practices and the highest quality of life and the greatest client satisfaction are the ones with the soft skills, as we would call them, the emotional intelligence that I talk about that all day, every day. I think it's absolutely mission critical to being a successful attorney. The trait that's required to be a successful, high-performing attorney is that emotional intelligence that we're not taught in law school. And to just name that quickly, to summarize that, it's knowing your own emotions, knowing what you're feeling, and to the extent to which you're feeling it, and then managing those emotions yourselves, and then having a deep sense of empathy and understanding, almost a spidey sense sometimes of what others are feeling, and then navigating their emotions as well. And there's these four pieces that are so inextricably intertwined that you can't have some without the other and still be fully functioning through that emotional intelligence lens. So I really do think emotional intelligence is critical. I also think it subsumes a lot of other skills that I think are critical. That client interaction, in my opinion, all emotional intelligence, taking good care of your clients, anticipating their needs, serving them well, interacting and communicating with them well. That's all emotional intelligence. And then well-being is another trait, another skill that I think is critical. And that's why I do the work I do. Back to your early question, it is a performance issue. I think for so long, well-being was thought of as something that's optional or something that just feels good, or that, for people who are lazy and don't care about their practice and they just want to go to the spa and on long walks and take hot baths. No, it really is a performance issue, as we'll talk about today. If you don't have well-being and a high level of well-being, you literally cannot think at your best. You could have all those hard skills and substantive skills, but you cannot access them fully without having a strong sense of well-being, having your cup full, having your mental health and strength intact. So I think emotional intelligence and well-being are two, not exclusively so, but two of the most critical traits that I see and competencies that I see in high-performing attorneys.
All right. Well, there is some stuff to unpack in that. First of all, I just want to underscore your first point there, because I'm glad you made it, because it is a good point, which is the hard skills, the substantive skills, the subject matter expert skills for whatever your discipline is, are critically important. When we have this conversation around mental health and around performance, I think we are skewing to the human skills, the people skills, the soft skills, whatever you want to call them, because they are so underdeveloped. But that's not to say that you don't still need to be an expert in your craft and hone your abilities to do the thing you do at a high level. I think that's really important and a big piece of the pie. And I think that might be why people get turned off, because they're like, well, yeah, but that's the air quote, that's the soft stuff. I need to be doing this. And it's like, yes, you do need to be doing that. And you need to be getting better at these other skills. So I think it's an addition, not necessarily a replacement or subtraction. Let's talk about emotional intelligence for a second, because I was going to ask you to define it, and then you went there and you defined it. I found your definition really interesting. I always have thought of emotional intelligence around understanding other people's emotions, but the way that you defined it, that was in there, but it was really more of a self-regulation. So can you just talk a little bit more about how you help people, or what are good ways that people listening to this can start to do some of this work and think about or recognize the emotions that they have and the impact that they're having on their performance?
I'm so glad you brought it up that way, O'Brien, because I think that's what many people think. They think emotional intelligence, it's purely how I interact with others. And that is part of it. That is, if we're imagining quadrants, those are sort of the two along the bottom, but the two along the top are identifying your own emotions and managing your own emotions, because you can't really empathize with others and navigate your relationship with them well if you haven't identified your own emotions and navigated your relationship with yourself, so to speak, well. And this is where and lawyers, many people struggle with this, lawyers in particular, because they're so up in their head all the time. It feels very vulnerable and very scary to think about emotions or feelings. And I even get pushback sometimes from my clients more on the speaking side. We're like, oh, I don't know. Can we talk about emotions or feelings? That might turn some people off or sort of scare them away. I'm like, that's part of the problem, is we're scared to feel our feelings. We're scared to talk about our feelings. It feels very vulnerable. It takes more emotional courage than we're willing to muster at the moment. And it's understandable. And I think that's why we want to approach ourselves and others with compassion, because sometimes feeling feelings can feel scary at first until you get used to it. And then you just realize it's just a feeling. So that first quadrant, as I was describing it, if we're imagining 4 quadrants, since we're audio only, I'll just describe it in a graphic way. If we've got 4 quadrants, we've got our upper left is emotional self-awareness. That's where you can accurately define and describe and name your feeling. Another word for this is emotional granularity. It's moving beyond the traditional happy, mad, sad feeling words and thinking, well, actually, maybe I'm embarrassed, or I feel rejected, or I'm frustrated, or I'm not feeling heard or respected or something. And you could maybe even feel, as I'm just saying those words, they feel more vulnerable. They feel more personal. I often say that I see anger in attorneys, and really in anyone, but certainly in attorneys, as a mask feeling, because anger feels safer than feeling embarrassed. It feels safer emotionally than feeling rejected or stupid or incompetent or which would be horrible for an attorney, because we love to know everything all the time and always be right. But at the end of the day, those are the feelings. And if we can name them, then we can actually manage them and move through them, because that next quadrant, the upper right quadrant, would be managing your own emotions, figuring out how to calm yourself down and regulate your emotions. We use the word dysregulation when your emotions are running the show, and regulation when you are running the show, and you're able to manage those emotions, not in a toxic positivity way, not in a denying the emotion way, but really moving through it using tools like taking a breath. You mentioned the Navy SEALs. You likely know this. They use breathing techniques. They use box breathing, right? It's one of the ways under very high stress situations that they calm their body and their mind so they can perform at their best. If it's good enough for the Navy SEALs, it's good enough for lawyers, right? Because there's science behind it. There's science behind it. If we can regulate that fear, in that situation with the Navy SEALs, or confusion or worry, whatever it is, and take a breath, let our mind calm down to the extent that we can get back into that thinking center of our brain, our prefrontal cortex, rather than being ruled by our amygdala, our fight or flight function in our brain. Suddenly we can think more clearly, make better decisions, interact more thoughtfully, take a step back, and choose our next word and action in a way that we can't when we are being ruled by those emotions. So that's why those top two quadrants, while none of them are better or worse than others, the first two, the self-focused ones, are so very foundational to emotional intelligence, because I can't interact with you the way I want to if I'm not regulated. If I'm feeling stressed or worried or overwhelmed or burnt out or whatever I'm feeling and I'm not managing that well, my interactions with you will never be as good as they can be.
So I interviewed a gentleman on here, Gary Nessner, who was a lovely guest. And he at one point was the head of the FBI's hostage negotiation team. And he said it very succinctly, which I loved, is rationality and emotions are a teeter-totter. They can't be both high or low at the same time. And so if your emotions are high, your rationality is going to be low. And the only way to get back to thinking and acting rationally is to lower your emotions. And the only way you lower your emotions is by recognizing them and addressing them. And so I interviewed him early on in this podcast, and I think about it, and I'm sure I bring it up on here a lot because I do think that is critically important. And it's so easy, to your point. Not only is anger a masking emotion, it also can feel good. Like, it can feel good to be mad. There's something about it, even though we're like, well, no, you can't feel good and be mad. But there is sort of something satisfying about just raging at a situation, right? It like fills some primal part of us. And so to be able to calm that down in order to identify what the real thing is under there is, I mean, it's hard, but it's really important. So because it's hard, I mean, this is why therapists exist. This is why coaches like you exist. It can be hard. I mean, I'm really good and I'm really introspective, and I can do a lot of this work. And yet I recently hired a coach for myself, and she's shining a light on all these blind spots that I was not willing to go. Can we do this on their own? Are there any good exercises that people can use to start to do this, to build this skill without going out and hiring a coach and spending a bunch of money? I mean, I know that that's a great solution, and I encourage people to check that out. But for people who are just like, I don't know, like, show me the money a little bit, get me started. What do you suggest?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to touch back on your thought about anger feeling good, it feels powerful. I mean, that's, as you were saying that, and like sometimes it feels, I think there's a powerful feeling to it. I think there's a feeling of control that we desperately desire to have as humans. It's hard to remember that we actually don't have much control over many things that happen to us in our lives. Anything, right? I mean, we've talked our own mortality being the most significant, but really, if you think about how much of your day you're actually even in control of what's happening to you, or at a moment's notice, some intervening circumstance could throw off your best laid plans. I think we desperately want control because it makes us feel, and not to get too existential, but I know you like to go there too. It makes us feel not only in control of our moment, but in control of our future, not the least of which being our own mortality. We desperately seek control, and anger feels powerful, and it feels like we're controlling a situation. And sometimes when we're very dysregulated and we're yelling or raging, to use your word, maybe we actually in some way are controlling a situation or another person, not in a healthy way, not in a productive way, not in a sustainable way, but it almost reinforces, see, when I get angry, I get my way and I have control. But we look at the outcome of that, we realize it wasn't in the best interest of ourselves or another person or a situation in the long run. And that's why we want to move to a healthier, more sustainable place of control, realizing that you can also have control when you're regulated. You can actually have more impact. And we know this is emotional intelligence. We can have more impact on a situation in a long-term healthy way when we are regulated, thoughtful, and intentional in our reactions. And we can only do that when we're regulated, when we turn that temperature down. I love the teeter-totter metaphor. I will use it in the future and give credit to Gary. It's brilliant. And I also had a psychologist once share with me the mantra that they use that is to strike while the iron is cool. Instead of striking while the iron's hot, which again has that powerful, active, controlling feel to it. And many of us, myself included, who are action oriented, think, I want to get in there and I want to fix it and I want to change it and I want to move on. And that's the end of it. And sometimes I do that when I'm not completely emotionally regulated and or when somebody else with whom I'm dealing is not completely emotionally regulated. And if we're not both in our right mind and we're not regulated, the outcome will never be as good as it could be if we were. So if we can wait until the iron is cool and strike then, we will always get better results, think better thoughts, take better actions. So to your question, how do we do that?
Write the email. Well, it's like write the email, walk away, come back, delete it, and write what you should have written the first time. It's like, it's, same advice, different medium.
But that's exactly it. Do what you need to do to emotionally purge it out. That's the thing. I'm never going to say, don't feel mad. Don't feel big feelings. Don't feel anger. Don't feel rage. Go ahead and feel it if it's there, because emotions are like beach balls. If we try to push them underwater, they're just going to pop back up with even more velocity because we tried to push it down further. So feel the feelings, even when they feel a little scary. Get out. This is where I'm getting to the answer to your question. Get out a journal, write it down, really purge it out just through writing. Some of these sound trite and you're like, really, Kendra, you're going to recommend journaling? Yes, because there's research and data to share that it gets that emotion out, helps you rationalize, helps you get things out of your mind through written form. You could type it out, but the research shows that handwriting it is even more powerful. Actually helps in your process of self-discovery, because you might find yourself writing something, an insight into the situation that you didn't even have when you entered, and you just started that sort of verbal and emotional vomit onto the paper. And suddenly you're having insights. Well, maybe this is why I'm so upset, or maybe this is why they reacted the way they did. And suddenly you're, oh my gosh, I either have more compassion and self-insight for myself or for them, whatever's happening there. So I think writing it out, identifying that emotion. Again, I mentioned emotional granularity. If you Google it, there's a feelings wheel. There's easy ways to find. Gloria Wilcox is the doctor who first showed that. You might have seen the image before. It's just lists and lists of feelings words that I recommend to my clients. I share with them the feelings wheel just because it has the feelings that we all instinctively say we're feeling. That's the happy, mad, sad, excited, those sorts of obvious ones. But then it's a wheel. And the farther you go out into those spokes, the more refined and granular those emotions get. And if you can, and I have my clients either name or circle sometimes, what emotion are you actually feeling? Farther you get out on that wheel, the more specific the emotion becomes. And when you hit the right one, it almost resonates like a tuning fork. You're like, oh, that's the one. And I mentioned anger earlier because a lot of times there is embarrassment or rejection underneath that. And so if you can actually just take the moment to find and feel the feeling under it and have a bit of grace for yourself to say, wow, I wasn't actually angry at that person in the meeting. I was embarrassed because they called out my mistake publicly and I felt foolish. I was embarrassed. Or I found out they all went out to dinner last night and didn't include me. And I felt rejected and isolated. And like, again, it's much softer and more vulnerable, but it's truer. And if you can just say, wow, that's what it was. Like, for me, I'm always very candid over it. I'm like, maybe that's mine sometimes. Like I was the dorky 7th grade girl who didn't feel like she had any friends and never had anybody to hang out with. And so I know that social rejection is one of my soft buttons. Like I know it'll get me if I feel left out, and I have to work on that because because then I can talk myself through it a little. I can be like, Kendra, maybe you had mentioned you were tired and wanted to go to bed and that's why they didn't invite you out. Or you mentioned having to call your kids or whatever it is. Maybe it had nothing to do with me, but I have to have that process. So I call that self-coaching. You mentioned like, how do we not pay therapists and coaches? You can ask yourself the same powerful questions that your therapist or your coach is going to ask you. Sometimes I even write that out. I write the question as if a coach or a therapist was asking me the question, and then I write my answer. as if I was answering my own questions. So you can coach yourself.
Yeah. I do that too, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. I found that just to say like, oh, go journal, I just end up sitting there and I'm like, what am I even, what am I here to do? And I really struggle to just do that free form journaling. But we are big fans of journaling here on the show and have seen the power of it. But yeah, I need some prompt. And so to ask myself some kind of question of like, why do I feel this way? What's going on here? How do I get over this? What's causing this? Like those types of questions, those discovery questions about yourself lead to a lot of great opening up. And one point, so I've had 2 hostage negotiators on the show. Another gentleman, Derek Gaunt, he and his business partner, Chris Voss, talk about how labeling an emotion actually lowers the emotion. And you can do this with other people. In their context, they talk about doing it with other people. If somebody comes at you and is in a highly emotional state, by just saying, oh, it seems like you're mad. It seems like this made you mad. It feels like you're upset. It feels like you're embarrassed here. Labeling those emotions, if you can get it right or get them to say it out loud, actually lowers their emotion. And so it can bring that rationality back. But it does the same thing for us if we can do it for ourselves. Identifying that we're embarrassed starts to lower that emotion in ourselves. And I think that's a great point that you brought up.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, O'Brien. There's research on that when we can name that emotion effectively, it's like popping a little bubble. It's just like if you nail it that it's embarrassment for yourself or someone else, that emotion feels in a way almost seen, heard, acknowledged. You're like, yes, I am. And then it just dissipates. It's like it just needed to be witnessed or acknowledged. It doesn't go away completely, but really, I think the research shows it's a 30% discharge, sort of diminishment of the intensity of the emotion when you can just name it. And so, and I find that, and people are afraid to, they just think again, oh, that doesn't really matter. No, try it. I mean, really try naming the feeling. And to your point on the journaling prompts, if you can say, what am I feeling right now? Grab your handy feelings wheel, pick out your feelings that are resonating with you. Even as you write them, you might feel a resonance in your body. You might tear up. I say there's truth in tears. And if you feel yourself, I know not everyone's a crier. And I think sometimes like we see that as vulnerability and we withhold there too. But when I feel myself tear up or I see others tear up, even if just for a second, you know, the pitch has hit the tuning fork, that there is truth in that tear. So if you feel that, you're like, yes, that's it. And another journaling prompt, you named some fantastic questions. I also need a question to respond to. Otherwise, I literally don't even know where to start. I'm like, it's 72 degrees outside today. I just don't even know. But if you ask those feelings, work was fine. Everything's okay. No, I mean, but if you're coming at it from a charged space, you can ask, what am I feeling? And just writing those feeling words, what caused that feeling? And many times I offer the secondary question, what thought caused that feeling? Because situations don't cause our feelings. Our thoughts about situations cause our feelings. A very important clarification.
It's very stoic of you.
Very stoic of me. That's right. Situations are neutral. It's how we respond through our thoughts that then causes our feelings. So try to dig back instead of saying, oh, he made me so mad or that traffic made me so frustrated. My thought was that he should have said something else, or he was disrespecting me, or he's out to get me. He just said words. I interpreted them and then embraced some sort of feeling. Same with any situation. So ask what thought is causing this feeling in me. And then one I love is, why does this matter to me? I think that if you can keep excavating underneath the situation and the feeling as to why it matters to you, and ask yourself that question repeatedly, because you might say, why does this matter to me? Well, I want him to respect me. Well, why does that matter to me? Well, I want him to believe I'm capable. Well, why does that matter to me? And I'll just drill all the way down, because I'm afraid I'm not capable. Or in the past, I've been embarrassed, or when I was growing up, nobody thought I was smart enough or something. Like that's your self therapy, right? Where you get underneath it, you're like, holy moly. It's because, like everybody thought my older sister was so much smarter than me and I was the dumb one. And now here I am, a 56-year-old managing partner of a firm. I got called out in a meeting for making a mistake. I feel stupid. And I'm right back there at my kitchen table with my older sister being the smart one and me being the dumb one, right? Ask why it matters.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I love it. So that's the 5 whys. Just keep asking yourself, going down deeper. I have found recently some of the coaching work that I've been doing, we talk about the 5 fears. Basically all fears. Let's see if I can get them off the top of my head. The fear of death, the fear of the other, the outsider, the fear of chaos, the fear of the future, and the fear of insignificance. If you can remember those, and anytime you are triggered negatively, you think about which of these 5 is it. It's almost always one of those 5 that triggers it. And if you do that a couple times, what you really realize is it's usually 1 or 2. Almost all of my psychic chaos comes back to a fear of insignificance or a fear of death. It's like almost everything. And that's a lot of the coaching work I'm doing now. Like when we do get down to the root of all the things where I'm a little bit off, those 2 things creep up. And so I found that is kind of an interesting hack to asking the 5 whys.
That's a good one. And even as you're saying that, I'm thinking through my own self and things that trigger me or get me off my game a little bit. And they would definitely fall into one of those 5. I can see them. And I think sometimes for some people's brains, particularly lawyer brains that I work with, but brains that are more analytical, more logical, which I'm guessing a lot of your audience is because they resonate with how you approach things, which is seeking explanation, seeking reason. I'm the same way, which is why we love to geek out on these things together. Asking those questions forces your brain it doesn't force, but it sort of invites your brain to try to answer the question. And that's why when you can start with a savvy question like that, like which of these 5 is coming up for me? Your brain will look for the answer and then suddenly you'll hit it. And again, it's like that tuning fork resonance. You'll be like, oh, I'm afraid they don't like me, care about me, think I'm worthy. It goes right to the heart of that insignificance. That would definitely be one of mine as well. But your brain is going to try to find a solution. And in doing that, it starts to identify the fear or it starts to identify the feeling. And you will literally feel a bit of lightness out of that as you expel some of the fear, at least that gripping fear. You can see it for what it is. There's an emotional candor to it. Like, oh, that's just me being afraid that I'm insignificant. Maybe I have some work to do around my own self-confidence, around my own self-worth, around finding significance in who I am. And I don't need external validation for that. That's the next level. But at least I can see it for what it is. Let's just see emotions for what they are and be okay with them being, because that is a part of the human experience that none of us can evade.
So I want to move us on to another topic because I got another one I want to bring up. But I just want to tie this back for a second, which is we've gone real deep down emotional intelligence, identifying your emotions, doing a lot of this work that for a lot of people feels soft, squishy, a waste of time, unproductive. But the whole point about this, we started this talking about being high performing, about being high performers. I just want to remind people that the whole point of doing this work is not to sit and wallow in these emotions. It's to be able to move faster through these negative emotions so that we can get back to positive emotions, so that we're feeling good, so that we are performing at our best, so that we are living minute to minute the best versions of ourselves, the smartest versions of ourselves, the most driven versions of ourselves, the most connected versions of ourselves, and not getting stuck on this stuff. That's why this stuff is important. So just if we've lost anybody to the squishiness of this, I want to just remind people that this is about performance. And then I want to get back to maybe it falls into the soft skill category, but it seems like a harder skill just by the name of it, which is grit and mental toughness. Because there's one element where we need to be soft enough to understand what we're experiencing and address our emotions and be vulnerable. And then to perform great work, we also need to be gritty and deal with adversity and hang in there and keep going. So how do you think about grit and mental toughness when it comes to the work you do? And what is the place for that? And how do you frame it and coach it?
Absolutely. And I love this question because I think there's a lot in it. And it also goes back to even just the caveat you were giving before we switched to this piece, which is around if we've lost anyone because it feels soft. I would actually give you the coaching question, why? Why did it feel soft? Why did it turn you, like, what is it in there that caused you to maybe check out for a second? And just ask yourself those questions, because this is what I see lawyers and other high performers do, is they really, really don't want to talk about feelings. So they actually logic their way around having to talk about feelings. They're like, well, that's irrelevant to my work. That's irrelevant to my practice. That doesn't really matter. That doesn't help me perform better. And you're very smart. You wouldn't be listening to O'Brien's podcast if you weren't an intelligent person, because he's an intelligent guy and he goes deep and it's good stuff. And you wouldn't actually, this would not be interesting to you at all if you didn't have a level of intellectual sophistication. And so I know that you're an intelligent person whose brain is slippery and clever and savvy. And if you don't want to talk about emotions, you're going to find a way to avoid it. So I just invite you to think about where you checked out and why, because to O'Brien's point, this is all about not getting tripped up in your emotions by far. I mean, and the data's out there, all the research on emotional intelligence, far and away, the most successful people have the highest emotional intelligence. The data is out there.
So that makes me think about something. I was listening to another podcast and listening to somebody talking about con artists. And one of the things that they discussed on there was that we think that idiots are getting conned, but and they are to some extent, but actually the smarter you are, the easier it is to con you. Because you're smart enough to recognize you're smart and you think you're smart enough to avoid a con. I find that to be true for yourself too. The smarter people have an easier time rationalizing away things that they should in fact be facing. And so if you're sitting there with a rational mind being like, I'm rational, I see why this, you might also be conning yourself. And that's where getting a coach might be helpful. Which is why I hired a coach, because I can con myself pretty well. All right, so let's switch to grit and mental toughness. Can you frame that up for us a little bit?
Absolutely. So I see grit and mental toughness. I like to shift them just slightly from words like grit and mental toughness. And this is not me being contrarian with you, O'Brien, but I prefer words like resilience and mental strength. And even mental health, but that has sort of a different definition, just because I actually once did a program called Toxic Grit. I think this is part of what can lead to burnout sometimes. So these are why I actually avoid words like grit and toughness. They have kind of a hard edge. I have to push through no matter what, no matter how terrible I feel, no matter what's happening, I have to keep going, or I'm a failure, or I'm lazy, or I'm soft, or I'm incapable, or whatever it is. And sometimes the best thing we can do for ourselves is to stop. Or sometimes we need to take that moment to take care of ourselves so we can slow down to speed up. So resilience is the ability to move through those difficulties, to sort of manage ourselves through, to take good care of ourselves throughout them, and to survive them and thrive on the other side. So that's what we want to think about with resilience, that yes, life has its moments, work has its moments that knock us down, that challenge us, but we want to be able to withstand those difficulties and then to recover from them. And that's why we spend time talking about emotional intelligence and well-being, because you can withstand and recover from the difficulties faster when you have emotional intelligence and well-being. So with grittiness, of course, there's a stick-to-itiveness that we need to have. There is, again, that resilience that we don't give up at the first sign of struggle or strain. There's a commitment that keeps us going, that hopefully we're committed to some value or outcome that is worthy of our time and attention. But we also have the self-awareness to say, when is this actually so detrimental to my health or well-being that I need to take a step back and evaluate? And where can I give myself the ability to have mental strength to bolster myself, to give myself the skills to fortify myself? Like, that's why I like strength. Like, strength is, again, we want powerful, strong words. I want to build myself up so that no matter what comes my way, it can't knock me down. And if it knocks me down, I have the tools to pick myself up again. That to me is resilience. Yeah. That's mental strength. And it feels much more positive and forward thinking. Otherwise, when I think grittiness or toughness, I start to feel tired really quickly. And then I start to get toward that place of burnout, which I know we can spend some time on. But I see sometimes people who end up in burnout are there because they've pushed and pushed and pushed without self-reflection, without any sort of self-care or strength building, to the point where they're burnt to a crisp and they have to take a leave, or they have to leave their job or the profession. And that's not what we want. We don't want them to get to that point. So let's build tools up to sustain.
How do you help clients determine where they are in the spectrum and whether they need to hang in there and deal with something difficult and face it, or whether they need to stop and take a break and recover and come back later?
Yeah. So burnout being all the way on sort of the right side of a scale of intensity would have markers like cynicism, where you're just really cynical about the people around you, about the work you're doing, things that used to entertain you and you used to find funny now just annoy you. So cynicism, exhaustion, which speaks for itself, and inefficacy, where you start to just not feel good at your job anymore, that you start to be very down on yourself, feeling incapable and incompetent of work that you sort of intellectually know you're decent at, but you're starting to tell yourself you're not good at it. So those are the three hallmarks or really pillars of burnout. Then if we were to, again, I'm going to describe a scale. If we were to move from the left side of a scale, which would just be sort of boredom, like you're not pushing very hard, you're not doing anything terribly intense, all the way over to the right, which would be burnout. So if on the left, you're at boredom, the next step to the right would be what we call eustress, which is something I talk about. We can just touch on really quick, but it's sort of positive stress. If you've seen Kelly McGonigal's work, The Upside of Stress, it's that mentality. Highly recommend her TED Talk and her book on the topic. Seeing some stress as positive, being in that flow, Csikszentmihalyi's sort of being in the state of flow and being at the top of your game takes some pressure to get there. You can't get to the top of your game without a little bit of pressure. So some healthy pressure is okay. Call that eustress, positive stress. If you have too much of that and for too long and with too much intensity, you slip into overwhelm. And from there, you can lead into burnout. So what do you do along the way to answer your specific question is it takes self-awareness to know, is this momentary or is this going to last for a long time? So in our work, of course, there are peaks of intensity and stress, and that might be a stressful time, but you might be able to say, yes, I'm closing a big deal, or I have a big trial, or I have 3 deadlines that all came up at once, but it's going to be a short-term intensity that I have to move through, that I have to have the resilience to move through, as opposed to this is nonstop. It is always like this. There is never a space to take a breath, and that's where we start to risk that burnout, that maybe a need for reevaluation. Of course, there's also, toxic work environments where maybe somebody said one thing one time that wasn't well chosen, and you take appropriate action around that and it's done and you can move on. But maybe it's incessant. Maybe you are in a work setting that shows no signs of getting better. and it's only going to continue to diminish your quality of life, that might be a time to say, maybe it's time to think about another opportunity, to work with a career coach, to put my resume out there, to work my network, whatever. So I think it's looking for duration, frequency, and intensity to make sure that your perspective is true of if this is something that you can walk through for a little while or something that you might need to evaluate if it's sustainable in the long term.
Thank you for that. I think those visuals that you're describing help too. One other question around this is recovery is kind of a fad right now, and it also is kind of a cliche a little bit too. Oh, I need to take me time, self-care. There's sort of the like toxic positivity movement that is like, oh, everybody just needs self-care. You just need to go to your spa day and not take on any stress in the world and just like totally check out and not worry about your responsibilities. And like, that's not real for most people either. So what does good recovery look like in the world that you live in?
I agree with you that sometimes we chalk up recovery to self-care. I think anyone who's done it knows that that's not actually restorative. You know, the day at the spa, as lovely as that sounds, if I have to jump back into my workday tomorrow or Monday or whatever that looks like, it feels good. It's sort of a temporary fix. But I think the long-term sustainable recovery is more complex than a spa day or a hot bath or a long walk. I think those things actually can be part of recovery, time that we can, for those of us who are in this world of work known as knowledge workers, you know, we're really just mental athletes, as we've talked about. We're using our brain. I'm certainly no athlete. All I do is use my brain all day. If I were an athlete, which is sort of what you're alluding to, if I was a physical athlete, I couldn't do that all day long. I couldn't go work one of my body parts all day long to fatigue, past fatigue. I would have to recover, which of course is where that recovery term comes from. But in many jobs, professions, certainly the legal profession, we don't think about it that way because our brain doesn't give us obvious signs that it's fatigued. It does if we start to look more closely. It's easier to ignore. When you have muscle fatigue, a point to which I've only been about twice in my life, but I do recall it vividly, like my muscles literally wouldn't fire. Like I could not do one more sit up. It was a strange phenomenon when my brain was saying, Kendra, sit up one more time. And my abdominal muscles were like, heck no. And they were not listening. I was at muscle fatigue. So I decided never to do that again. But anyway, but mentally, that's my excuse. No, but mentally, we don't have that strong of an indicator, but we can start to notice, and you know this, that your productivity is diminishing. The quality of your thoughts are diminishing. If you're writing something, and I get to this point, I hate to, I just don't have any words left. And what I'm writing barely makes sense. Like, I know I'm going to have to go back and do this tomorrow. Why am I still doing this? That's when you need recovery. Your mental muscle is at and beyond fatigue. So that means sometimes taking in no new information. I take sort of input or consumption breaks because your brain is tired, or something that really doesn't strain your brain at all. Because sometimes I'll be tempted, even on that walk or whatever I'm doing, to listen to the news. Terrible choice most times, or even I love podcasts and nonfiction books, and I'll pop in my Audible. My brain is like, Kendra, no more, please, a break. And that's when I have to find something like a fiction book or just nothing at all, like being alone with myself in some stillness, walking through the woods. I think that's real meaningful recovery, is to give your brain an actual break, but also to set up systems so that you don't get to this point in the future. So that's what makes it sustainable. It's why the spa day doesn't work. It's one day where you take the day off, and it's just a weird example, or whatever it is, it's a one-off fix. You have to look at the conditions that created the need for recovery in the first place and see what you can do about those. Can you change things around your work to make it more sustainable? Can you block your time better? Can you have better boundaries around in-office communications? Can you have some hard communications to create buttresses around people in the workplace that are causing strain or strife in the work? Whatever it is, but sometimes it's a matter of having a courageous conversation or doing something that feels a little uncomfortable, like shifting your work schedule or the way you do your own patterns in order to create something sustainable. That is what, recovery is. But I would say, what is meaningful recovery? I think it really is a consumption break for most of us and some time away. And people don't do that enough. And I think we need to remind people that taking a vacation, taking a day off isn't just a luxury. It really is that recovery. It's why when you come back from a vacation, especially one where you've been able to log off and not be on your computer the whole time, your brain is restored. Again, it literally is physically restored. But we've made all of these excuses that we have to keep working or something's going to burn down without us, when the best thing you can do for your work product is to give your brain a break.
Yeah, I love that. The other one that I'll add to that I have found for myself is community and connecting with my community of my family, with my community of my friends, community at work, like really just connecting with the people and not having any task to do or anything, but just spending meaningful time together. I find that is a big recovery tool as well.
I would add one thing to that, O'Brien. I think we're showing, and tell me if I'm wrong, would you label yourself an extrovert or an introvert, or both?
I'm an introvert who likes to also be around people.
There you go. Okay. So, I just think it's self-knowledge around that, because for some people, recovery will be in community and with others. And of course, the research shows that social connection is hugely important to our well-being and our recovery. But for some people, being alone is the most restorative thing they can possibly do. So I think it's self-awareness around what fills your cup and having that idea.
And I get restored alone as well. I sitting with a journal, sitting with a book, like going for a walk by myself. I love to be alone and have my time. I think one of the things that I've paid more attention to, especially coming out of the pandemic, is that community is also a recovery tool, and it's a mental health tool. That if we are connected to a community, that actually can ground us and make us feel more resilient and just better about life in general. And so I think people have overlooked that. And I think we need to be getting back to that connection as we continue to come out of the pandemic and work off the effects that had on our mental health, on our behavior, everything. Good clarification.
Yeah, and it's a good thing to remember, too, even for introverts, that sometimes stretching ourselves to have community. We know humor is a great form of recovery, laughing, enjoying time with others, and we sometimes dismiss that, too. So I think that's a great add to think about who you can connect with, whether in a large group or a small group, whatever fills you up.
Yeah, and I think misconception that I saw a lot of people having after the pandemic was we all got used to working from home, or everybody who was doing thought work who could work from home got used to it, and it was easy, but it wasn't the best for us, at least not all the time. And everyone I talk to in my office, everyone I talk to in the business community that I'm in, everybody likes the flexibility, but everybody enjoys the sense of community that they have being back in person with people. And I think you can hide behind being an introvert, but I've yet to meet anybody who's truly introverted who doesn't also feel good being a part of something. Maybe you don't want to be out in front of people all the time. Maybe you don't want to be around new people, but you like everybody likes feeling connected to a group of people. I think it's where we are at our best. Doesn't have to be big and crazy. Doesn't have to be super extroverted, but I think community is important for all of us.
Yeah,
it's a belief that I've had through and out of the pandemic.
I always like to remind my clients that introversion doesn't necessarily mean that you don't like being with other people. It just means that you fill your cup by being alone. It's where you get your energy. So introverts get their energy by being alone. Extroverts get their energy being with other people. Extroverts can like being alone. Introverts can like being with other people. But at the end of the day, when it comes to restoration, that is just one hallmark of introverts versus extroverts, is the source of energy. Like, I was at a networking event last night. I loved being with all of the women I was with at this event, but it doesn't fill me up from an energy standpoint. It fills me up in other ways. But I also need some time alone before and after that to really fill myself. So specific to recovery, there's just an awareness around where your energy comes from, where an extrovert walks out of a networking event like that and they're on fire. They're in their glory. They could stay up the rest of the night. They're so excited. And being alone can feel a little bit draining to them. So it's a way, another point of self-awareness is to where your actual energy and where that filling of the cup happens for you.
Yeah. No, good. All good points. All good points. Well, we have run out of time, even though I have another half sheet of questions for you and a bunch of things that we could talk about. We may have to do a part 2 at some point, but Kendra, thank you for coming on the show and for sharing all this. Is there there's a lot we didn't get to, but is there anything that you want to say on what we've been talking about or one more point you want to add to this to kind of sum this up from your standpoint?
Oh, there's so much. And we knew, O'Brien, that we enjoy these topics so much together. And I've enjoyed being here today. I think to sum up things is don't dismiss the soft skills. They are so mission critical to high performance. Back to what we were talking about earlier. Not only will you perform better, I promise you, all the data is there. I'm the highest achieving, most ambitious person you might ever meet. And yet, this is the work I have to do to sustain it, because otherwise I get crushed underneath my own desire to achieve and to do more and have a greater impact. So these are the skills that will set you apart. So take them seriously. And if you need professional help, ask for it. It goes without saying, but I'll say it just in case. There are times and places to hire coaches and to bootstrap this and to get a journal and to read a book. But there are times too to reach out for professional help to a therapist or to others who can really facilitate things. If you get to the point where you think, I really don't know that I can do this on my own, I need to get some help. And that's what I recommend to my clients too, is do what you can on your own. I'm all for self-efficacy. And I think that's the best thing, is when we can coach ourselves and help ourselves find solutions. But don't be afraid to ask for help outside yourself too, because that can make all the difference. Great points. Well, to everybody listening, thank you for tuning in. I hope this has been helpful. And there's just a ton of great stuff in here to think about to make sure that we all are performing at our best and that we can show up every day and give our full energy. And so best of luck to everybody out there. Kendra, keep doing great work. And thank you for coming on the show. Thanks for having me, O'Brien. It's been a pleasure.
Hey folks, one last thing before you go. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to hit subscribe so you can stay up to date with future guests. That's it. Thanks for coming. Go make the most of your business and the people in it.